terms of delivering innovative solutions across Nigeria and perhaps some of the projects that you're looking to do here in Nasarawa State?
Thank you. Thank you, Gori. It's a pleasure to be here. I stand on all existing protocols. So I'll just quickly, give a context. InfraCredit, for full name, is Infrastructure Credit Guarantee Company Limited. We were established by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority alongside other development finance institutions. We're supported by the KFW Development Bank, Africa Finance Corporation, the UK through Private Infrastructure Development Group, Garanco, and Infraco Africa. We were established to help promote long-term local currency financing for infrastructure in Nigeria. We provide local currency guarantees to mobilize private capital from institutional investors like the local pension funds and insurance companies. So our role is quite critical when we look at domestic resource mobilization, which was spoken about in the earlier panel sessions. To date, we've helped companies to raise a total of about 114 billion naira in aggregate across 7 different infrastructure companies or projects, cut across multiple states in the country. And this funding has come mainly from local pension funds. So what we've been able to establish is the potential for allocating pension funds in long-term finance to build infrastructure projects in the country. And we've done this by extending the tenor of financing with our guarantees. Very recently, we supported a free trade zone to raise 20-year financing in local currency, which is unprecedented, but it also demonstrates the potential. Now, as we look at the potential for subnational state governments, one of the key concerns, and I know it was raised in the earlier panel session, was how risk can be shared between the public and the private sector. So when we talk about PPPs, there must be mechanisms by which subnationals can provide some form of, confidence and risk sharing on, certain components of projects that private investors tend to struggle with. A couple of these include, risk around demand risk in some instances, policy risk when we look at the political cycle risk, but also, risk associated with, terminations. Now, one of the products we've been engaging, and we believe that there's a significant potential, is where subnational provide what we call annuity, which is essentially a committed, minimum assurance of revenue share that can allow, private sector to design, build, operate, finance projects, but under a KPI where there is risk also that is borne by the private sector and ensuring that projects can be delivered. Now, we believe that this provides a potential to attract, again, the same capital that we've been able to allocate with our guarantees to private corporates that have built roads and also industrial parks. And this could enable subnationals to finance projects off their balance sheet in tenors of up to 20 years, thereby reducing the cost and increasing the allocation of capital. So we think, there are opportunities in this area, but also asset recycling, where projects are built by the subnational and recycled by attracting private sector to acquire these assets from their balance sheet. So these are two instruments that we believe could be very catalytic for subnationals. With Nasarawa State, with the plethora of projects that they've highlighted, there are obviously very strong opportunities to look at similar, instruments to help crowd in private capital, but also importantly, bring in the discipline and governance that private sector could bring in helping to drive, sustainable finance and also, governance on good projects. So I'll stop here.
No, thanks, Chinua. I think you've touched on something that is somewhat of a game changer when it comes to raising finance in Nigeria. Because one of the key things investors talk about a great deal is the forex risk that is associated with borrowing internationally and the low tenors that is available locally. Now, clearly, what drives these instruments that you're describing, the annuity PPPs, and the asset recycling, is access to funds, finance, that the state already has. And it's just been whispered to me that not more than like 10, 15 minutes ago, the Nasarawa Infrastructure Fund has just been signed in. So we've been joined on the panel by Mr. Chris Oshiafi, the Chair and Group Managing Director of Pan-African Capital Holdings. Sir, could you give us a sense of what this fund is being geared to do, and whether you agree, with what Chinua has just said, that these funds are funds that can be catalytic in terms of crowding in additional capital for infrastructure projects here in Nasarawa State?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of this session and to be part of the Nasarawa Investment Summit 2022. The fund that has just been set up, and we just executed the fund management agreement a couple of minutes ago, is actually meant to be an open-ended fund, which is supposed to accumulate capital for infrastructure projects for the state. One basic challenge that most of the subnationals have is ability to accumulate funds for projects. And what we have done in designing and putting a structure around this is that 5% of the IGR of the state will be dedicated and credited to this fund on an annual basis, 5%. And it is a law that's been passed by the House of Assembly and is being gazetted, so it's there. Now, when you have that kind of structure, what it enables you to do is that you accumulate funds. So as the IGR volume goes up, then the fund increases in size. You also then have the opportunity of being able to leverage that particular fund and then grow the size of that fund and be able to deploy it for projects. One of the challenges that we've seen is that even when you have well-crafted projects, state governments most times do not have that capacity to be able to execute projects that have economic advantages. Rather, they focus more on the social side. So this fund is going to focus on specific projects that are economically viable, so the projects on themselves could borrow directly for those projects, but the fund will be able to provide the equity or mezzanine that is required to be able to complete that project, and the project will develop, be analyzed on the basis of the strength of the cash flows of the project itself, so that it becomes a profitable venture for the state itself. Just talking about the asset recycling that Chinua also mentioned, we have seen that one of the challenges that most of the subnationals also have is the fact that they are not able to guarantee revenues. That's right. Revenues for the projects that are coming. So this fund, as it grows, will be able to provide some sort of revenue shortfall guarantee. And those revenue shortfall guarantees is what will catalyze how projects are proceeding in the state. Thank you.
I think the Nasarawa state government deserves a round of applause. This idea of the infrastructure fund is a massive enabler. Another thing, reflecting on some of the panels, the plenaries that have happened before ours, is this recognition that the subnationals have increasing prominence in terms of what their role is and how they contribute to economic growth. And what I don't want us to do as a panel is really just focus on government projects. There's a key role, and I think His Highness, the Emir of Okano mentioned this, is the creation of an enabling environment for private sector businesses. The NSIA, I know you're an active investor in Nasarawa State, and I know that your investments are, they're essentially private investments, even though you're a quasi-government institution. Can you give us a sense of some of the sort of innovation that you're bringing into identifying demonstration projects, perhaps with a sense of triggering productive investments and contributing to inclusive economic growth?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think a successful investment is as much a function of the investor in terms of his risk appetite, in terms of his requirement for upside potential, as it is the receptiveness of the subnational in terms of receiving the investment. By that, I mean the preparedness of that subnational to actually receive the investment. And that preparedness actually, there's a plethora of things that actually underpin that preparedness, all the way from the fiscal incentives that are offered to perhaps guarantees that are put in place by the state governments, to commitments around offtake, to the quality of the counterparty, i.e. the subnational, in terms of its commissioner for investments, in terms of whatever investment agency that actually interfaces with investors. So I think it is as much our risk appetite as it is the preparedness of the state to receive our investors. In terms of investments that have worked, I think the first thing has always been about non-cash contributions or in-kind contributions by the subnationals as a way to actually sort of stake its claim to the equity of that business. I think it is always helpful. Number two has always been waiving a lot of the fiscal costs that in the context of the project always apply. And then number three, always trying to match the aggressive timelines that a private sector actor, particularly because of how timelines impact returns, trying to match those aggressive timelines as much as possible. The investment that you mentioned that we've made in Nasarawa is actually poultry feed business in Panda. What we did was acquire a very modest poultry feed milling business. We invested about $25 million to expand the capacity of the mill, as well as backward integrate towards the production of the feedstock. And I must say, even though the state government is not a direct participant in the investment, they have actually ensured that the surrounding infrastructure in order to make our investment attractive was actually undertaken by the states. In this case, they ensured that the roads from Abuja to Panda, actually even to our site, was actually laid, was actually flattened, just to ensure that we could receive all of the substantial equipment that is required to actualize our investment. And these equipment are massive. We're talking about pivot irrigation machines. We're talking about combined harvesters, sorts of things that you would need for agriculture. The state government actually went out of their way at no cost to the investment to ensure that as much as possible we could actually bring down the cost of actualizing that investment. And I think that is something that must be said in terms of creating that enabling environment, that willingness of the subnational to work with the private sector actor to make sure these investments continue to come through.
No, thank you, Aminu. One of the things that I think it's important to mention, because we've had two plenaries and a lot of the focus really has been in outsized investors like Alhaji Dangote. But you are starting off in Nasarawa with a relatively small investment. But one of the things that you've mentioned elsewhere that is what you're trying to do is use that as a demonstration project. Can you say a little bit more about perhaps what sort of ecosystem and value chain impact you're having with that $20 million project that you've started off with?
Indeed. Typically, the way NSI operates is we have a three-pronged approach to making direct investments. We either invest directly, so we find a project that we feel satisfies all of our investment criteria and we deploy capital, or we enter into a co-investment vehicle with a strategic partner that can offer not only financial capital, but also strategic capital. And then together, we implement projects. And then finally, we actually create companies and capitalize those companies, agree the business plan with the management of those companies, and let them run. And I think that what we have observed from those strategies is that given we are doing things from a fundamental basis, it is important to have demonstration projects. Those projects actually allow us learn. It allows us understand whether the business plan that has been created to implement those projects makes sense, particularly in the context of the reality of the situation. And to the extent it does, we then, as a phase 2, proliferate such that we can then de-risk that expansion stage of the project. So I think that approach has worked in the agriculture space with our fertilizer business and our petrochemicals business. It has worked in the healthcare space with our oncology business and our diagnostic business, and on and on. So I think that strategy is very important.
All right. Chinua, I see you with your hand up. In a moment, we're going to go online. We are joined online by the Chief Executive of the Infrastructure Corporation of Nigeria. So Chinua, I'll let you bring that point, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Lazarus Angbazo. So if we can make sure that he's connected and we can see him, to tell us a little bit more about this new infrastructure fund that the federal government has put in place, and their plans as they are emerging, particularly as it impacts subnationals. Chinua.
Oh no, I just wanted to add to Aminu's point that InfraCredit is an example. So we've almost done 5 times the multiple of NSI's seed capital of $25 million in InfraCredit. We're currently capitalized at $195 million, and that's as a result of incremental investments from other DFIs and also institutional investors. So this is how catalytic capital can mobilize or crowd in other investors. So I just wanted to highlight that we're a good example of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Chinua. That's really, really helpful. I think that last point is critical. It's about recognizing that capital effectively begets capital. Do we have Dr. Angbazo online? Can we get him connected so that we can see him in the room? While we wait for that connection to be in place, we've heard from a panelist of institutional investors, but our commercial banks also have a really, really important role in ensuring that the economic activity that makes the funding of infrastructure financing possible is supported. So, Mr. Lawal, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Keystone's perspective on this and how you're being part of the solution in terms of supporting economic activity that enables the funding of infrastructure projects?
Thank you very much, Daniel. To start off, I would like to say that Nasarawa State has taken a very important first step. Nasarawa State has taken a very important first step in taking its infrastructure development in its own hands. There's still another level, which is the third tier of the subnationals. At that point, we as advisors come in and provide information on how to make economic activity viable. I need to properly dimension this. As a commercial banker, if it makes money, it makes sense. So there seems to be a lot of supply of infrastructure funding, but I would prefer, or I would want to see that the funding goes to where the demand is. You have your objective as a state or as a subnational or as an organization, and what is your objective is to increase the economic activity in the area. Therefore, the infrastructure or whatever infrastructure funding has to be directed with that objective in mind. There is a multiplier effect with economic activity. We have noted and we have observed over time, if you invest in infrastructure that increases activity in one place, it will lead to another and another and another. And this multiplier effect is what we as bankers look out for. There is a danger of what I think someone mentioned earlier, as social infrastructure. Social infrastructure is one of those goods that do not give the returns that are expected, mostly of them, except, of course, education. In the short term, we're looking at short-term physical infrastructure right now. Your objective as Nasarawa State, we have noted that Nasarawa State is an agrarian society or has huge agricultural potential, agribusiness potential. Therefore, the infrastructure funding would be directed towards increasing or enhancing this agricultural activity. I, as a banker, would look at these opportunities, and as they say, if it makes sense and it makes money, the funding will come. That is just the reality of it. The funding will come. Why does Lagos work? Lagos works because everything is commercially oriented. If it makes money, I will fund it. Secondly, we need to look at the size of the infrastructure, and you correctly mentioned that they're the big players, Dangote Industries, and so on and so forth. You sometimes have to make infrastructure small but scalable. Where it's scalable, you start small, makes it viable. I mean, you're looking at different funding models: build, operate, and transfer, build, operate, and own. In order to get funding for this, you have to dimension it in a way that it is easily chewable and swallowable by the investors themselves, and the returns are very visible within a short term. And this way, there is a turnaround period, a quick turnaround period. I know I'm speaking from a strictly commercial sense, but this is the world that we live in. This is a capitalist world. You have to show investors. I think the former governor of the central bank alluded to that. You have to show them that if you put your money in, this is how you will get it out. This is when you will get it out. And that creates a whole new world of commercial-oriented investment. So, I mean, in a nutshell, this might not be what we're bankers, so we're expected to say things that people might not necessarily align with. But the reality is that if it makes money, then there will be investment for it. People invest where they will make money. Thank you.
Spoken by a true banker. If it makes money, it makes sense. And there's a lot of truth to that. You know, one of the briefing for this panel, had the idea that, how do we mobilize and put to productive use idle capital? I think there's an oxymoron in that. Capital is not idle. Capital is looking for opportunity. The question is, how do you create opportunity that attracts capital? Chinua, I'm going to come back to you after we've heard from Dr. Angbazo, because there is the need. Nasarawa needs social infrastructure. And there are models out there that enable funds to be structured to deliver social infrastructure. And I know that InfoCredit is at the heart of making that happen in Nigeria. But we'll park that for a second. And then if we have him online, and I can also see Dr. Brown online as well, so we will bring her in immediately after Dr. Angbazo. Dr. Angbazo, the Infrastructure Corporation of Nigeria is by far the biggest game changer that has happened over the last 12 to 18 months in terms of creating local capacity to fund critical infrastructure. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are, what your plans are, and how it impacts or can impact subnationals like Nasarawa State?
Thank you very much, Gori. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Yes.
I think the place I need to start is to, first of all, acknowledge all of the excellencies that are present and royal fathers that are present. I am really excited about what is going on. I want to thank His Excellency the Governor and the Chairman of Nasarawa Economic Advisory Council for their forbearance in allowing me to participate virtually. I would have loved to be there personally since this is home, to support the governor in welcoming probably the most distinguished participants in any state economic summit I've been part of in Nigeria. So this is really a tremendous accomplishment by the governor and the team. obviously, it's been a long day of listening to a lot of presentations, and what has been established here is a common context for why infrastructure matters. It's all about the quality of life, and nothing drives that quality of life better than investments in infrastructure, because it's all about jobs, it's about investment returns, it's about localizing capability for sustainable growth and sustainable supply chain in our countries. And it's really about enabling that whole growth and industrialization that people talk about. And I think it's been very well established, the case for Nigeria and the case for Nasarawa State in particular, in terms of the need for a big focus on infrastructure. And quite frankly, I think the initiative that you've kind of talked about in terms of the country really taking a very major commitment with respect to the creation of InfraCorp really speaks to that. There is a consensus in the country. It doesn't matter which administration, doesn't matter which state, doesn't matter which region of the country, that we all have a significant deficit in infrastructure as a country that is the leading country in Africa, and in terms of just the quality and the scale of the infrastructure that Nigeria deserves, we are not where we need to be. So what is the role of InfraCorp in this? We all share the same common aspiration. So InfraCorp's goal and purpose right now is to translate that aspiration and that vision into the realm of execution, into the realm of project delivery, and into the realm of operations. So what do we have to do with respect to making all of these a reality? First of all, InfraCorp itself has been created with a vision to be a 15 trillion investment vehicle that is dedicated to developing infrastructure and catalyzing private sector capital for the investment in this infrastructure under various PPP structures. It is being structured as a fund of funds, where we will work directly with 4 asset managers that have been appointed already. These are experts, both locally and globally, in infrastructure investments. But InfraCorp will also have the ability, similar to others, to invest directly in projects. It is being promoted by the CBN, NSIA, and AFC, 3 of the most impressive and significant institutions that we can boast as a nation. InfraCorp has been capitalized with 1 trillion. Sounds like a lot of money, but of course, the commitment and the challenge is to go raise additional capital up to the tune of 15 trillion over the next few years. The priority is around public and federal projects, but also definitely open to subnationals as well, and to privately sponsored projects. And the key, though, is that these projects have to be commercially bankable, they have to be economically sustainable, and they have to be socially impactful as well. So how do we really make InfraCorp an institutional investor that keys into other pools of capital, both in country as well as offshore, and also make that connection back to the subnationals? For us, the first thing that we're doing is to understand where the money is. We have to follow the money. 1 trillion or 15 trillion is a good step in the right direction, but it's not enough. What Nigeria needs is far greater than that. We've got to listen and understand the requirements for investors, institutional investors that are both onshore, the banks, the pension funds, and obviously capital pools that are offshore outside of the country. And we need to demonstrate that we can actually design and develop projects that follow the principles for quality investments, for financial returns that are attractive and competitive, but that also have impact. Development with impact has to be part of what InfraCorp is going to be promoting here. And so if you think about then the core of what has to happen, because anybody that comes and travels into Nigeria can see the opportunity. It's massive. It's very massive. And then there's capital sitting out there. You've got the NSIS of the world, you've got the AFC, so now you've got InfraCorp as well, and you've got a number of other private infrastructure funds that are doing this, but you don't see the number of projects coming online quickly enough. And I think the core of it, the core of the problem, obviously, is the pipeline of investable projects. And this is where I think everybody understands that, the attrition rate from concept to financial close and to execution and operations of infrastructure project is extremely steep. So, for example, I think it's very commonly known that only about 10% of all projects that are announced actually get to financial close. That is a stunning disparity in terms of effort versus outcome and results. And even for those projects that achieve financial close, of course, we know the experience in Nigeria is they normally experience cost overruns. There's a significant delay in project delivery. And so the key steps that we have to kind of develop an institutional capabilities inside of InfraCorp that will then partner with the likes of all the panelists on this plenary, as well as the subnationals, is to really prioritize. I think this was mentioned by even the president of Ghana, around prioritization. So the sourcing and selection of projects, has to be very thoughtfully made, right? And really to demonstrate the quick wins and to demonstrate the ability that we can actually design and develop and execute and deliver projects. This is not an area where we can demonstrate a whole lot of credibility to the rest of the world because the country is littered with projects that are struggling. It's about creation of a very bankable business plan, and again, it was mentioned, feasibility studies are now templatized. There is no rocket science to this. So investing in that capability to actually get it going, it's really key. And I think the role of the subnationals here, because these projects, again, domiciled in their domains, they have to be a very critical partner from the point of view of approvals and guarantees and licenses and all of the documentation that is needed. I can go on and on and on, but at the end of the day, if you don't start right, you're going to get into a situation where projects really become aspirations and elephant projects and never get to that financial close and to the point where we're actually delivering operating infrastructure projects, which everybody can touch, everybody can use, everybody can see. This is the mandate that we have collectively as a nation. Nobody's going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. And even when you do that, ladies and gentlemen, we still have to go compete for that capital because we're really not the only option in town, right? I mean, Mother Nature has been very kind to us as a country. It's been very kind to us as a state. People have talked about our central location, the natural resource endowment, the quality of the people, the quality of the operating environment, and really the great incentives that the governor and the state, at least in Nasarawa State, have done to create that sort of incentives and the sort of enabling environment. I think this is something too that even at the federal level, we need to sort of deepen and intensify in order to actually put our state and our country, at the forefront as the differentiated, attractor of capital. So let me stop here, and I'm sure that there may be opportunities for us to kind of revisit some of the points that I've just made in terms of what InfraCorp is and where we are right now in sort of the rollout of this amazing initiative that we believe will truly help move the needle in terms of the stock of infrastructure in the country.
Thank you, Dr. Angbazo. So there you have it. There's 1 trillion naira available, but particularly for commercial projects, and the idea is to get that to 15 trillion. Now, we have Dr. Ola Brown online as well. She is a major investor in the health and well-being sector. I want to pull her into the conversation to give us a sense of some of the projects she's working on and some of the ideas that she's had to implement to get these projects financed. Dr. Brown, let's hear from you.
and it's nice to be with everybody today. Sorry I couldn't make it. We had a few logistical hiccups, but I'm glad that I can join you online, and I'd like to join Dr. Lazarus to stand on all existing protocols. So our company is called Muslim Doctors Healthcare Investment Company, and we focus on healthcare infrastructure in particular. We've completed diagnostic projects in helping to either finance, operate, build, or other sort of services. We've completed 7 projects, excluding all of our corporate projects. We have about 30 corporate projects, but our state projects, the subnationals, we've completed 7 projects in 6 out of 36 states. So the first thing I'd like to say is it is possible, not just for big banks or people that have been had government allocations given to them, but actually for real private businesses that have a profit incentive and have to give money back to shareholders to be able to do these investments, and that's exciting. So despite sort of the doom and gloom that we've heard today about the macro state of the economy, I think it's important to say that we've done these projects and they've been quite successful. We also have a pipeline of projects in 4 other African countries, both in West and Central Africa. And again, we're using innovative financing techniques to be able to think through these projects, to think about the project needs, and to get these things executed. Now, what do investors look for? What do I look for when I'm investing in any state or going into any country to invest? And I'll tell the story about my first ever loan. I started my business 10 years ago, so I'm a medical doctor. I worked 1 year in clinical practice before going into business. Subsequently, of course, taking my master's in finance and economic policy, then going on to study at Harvard infrastructure finance, now taking my PhD in economics. So a complete U-turn, but still in the healthcare space. So in terms of my very, very first loan, it was probably about 8 years ago, and it was from one of the Nigerian banks, and I knew the MD very well. So I thought, this is a relatively small amount of money, and I'm going to be able to just call and hopefully get some kind of overdraft. So I was very surprised when he took 5 times the amount of the loan amount in Eurobonds, just for a few days, in the Eurobond assets that my company held. And when I asked, I've always been a person of my word, and we're friends, we have an existing relationship. What was the need to take 5 times the amount in Eurobonds? And he said, oh no, that this doesn't affect our friendship, that this is just a little bit of assurance. And I think that what private investors are looking for when doing business with subnationals is some kind of assurance, particularly in social infrastructure place, the space where we play, where there may be, contrary to the contribution from Fiscal Bank, there may be some liability gap. So healthcare is essential for a number of reasons. It creates jobs. The biggest employer, I think, in the world is the UK NHS. No country without investing in healthcare and no physical therapy, policy papers and evidence bases, but they're not always considered economically viable. And sometimes there are viability gaps for healthcare projects that need to be built by government or external players. And that's what we look for when we're doing these projects in subnationals. We're always looking at how these subnationals can provide that extra bit of assurance. And unfortunately in Nigeria, the debt situation with the subnationals is that usually they don't have very much fiscal space left because of previous borrowing to provide that assurance. So we now have to think through new ways that they're able to do that. And I was interested and really happy to hear about Mr. Chris signing this infrastructure agreement that allows mobilization of IGR, because I think that that's a game changer. And if there's any way that the IGR's revenues or parts of the IGR revenue can be ring-fenced in a way that's transparent and in a way that's sort of falsifiable, then we can actually look at ways where these infrastructure gaps can be filled by deductions direct from source from IGR, particularly if IGRs are collected or parts of the IGR are collected by a third party. that could be a really innovative way of providing this assurance, as my banker friend taught me all those years ago, to private investors and to fulfilling those viability gaps that sometimes exist in social infrastructure. And I think that, this conversation so far has been about strictly commercial projects, so projects that sort of bring in the kind of revenues that cover the costs completely. But I think that I need to make a case for social infrastructure as well, where perhaps there are viability gaps and perhaps the government does need to come in. I mean, we've been very good over the years in Nigeria, subsidizing petrol and subsidizing fertilizer and even subsidizing power. And those are nice things to subsidize, but they're not the things that build economies. When you subsidize healthcare, when you subsidize education, people can work. They can't work when they're sick. They can't work when they're only one illness away from bankruptcy. So these are things that perhaps some of these guarantees that I'm sure Mr. Chinua will speak about, and some of these bits of assurance can help with these types of investments. But the wider picture, I think also political continuity for longer PPP projects is also a major concern for investors. A lot of investors are afraid to do anything for more than one political term. So PPPs by nature are usually long-term projects of 8, 10, 15, even 20 years. But when we don't have sort of the enabling policy and laws to ensure that if you're dealing with strictly a subnational without any form of ISPO, without any federal intervention, that we can continue to collect and the risks of expropriation at the subnational level are reduced, then we'll always be in a situation where projects are financed in quite an expensive way. Because there's that additional risk premium where people are thinking, are we going to be expropriated? Is the next government going to come in and cancel the project? Does this have, do we have a line of sight for the next 12 years that we envisage that we'll need to get a return on investment? So I don't want to talk too long because I know that this is quite a large panel. But in summary, I sort of made a case for social infrastructure. Commercial investments are great. But you need to be alive to be able to enjoy the proceeds from commercial investments. And social investments may sound social, but making a case for healthcare and the viability gaps to be covered, I would say healthcare is usually the biggest employer in any country. It's also, of course, increased employment leads to increased security, and there's a huge multiplier effect from jobs in healthcare. So even though it seems like a social investment, actually I think that healthcare is one of the most commercial investments that you can make. I also spoke about two of the things that I think are important on a subnational level. Number one, assurance. And I spoke about using IDRs to help produce that assurance in terms of deduction from source, preventing, and these kind of innovative structures. And then I also spoke about assurance from sort of the political cycle as well, in terms of putting enabling laws and policies in place to make sure that investors have a line of sight over 10, 15 years as opposed to 3 or 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I think what a fantastic way to bring to a close an expert panel. I feel, given the experience and the expertise on this panel, we could go on and on and on for a little bit longer, but I'm hearing from the organizers that it's time to start thinking about landing this plane. So as we bring this panel to a close, I think, we've heard quite a lot. The key things here is that there's capital available to deliver projects in Nasarawa State. The infrastructure fund has been established. There's also other funds and institutional investors who are actively investing in Nasarawa State. But there's a clear sense that these projects need to make sense. So this is where the project prioritization needs to go in. But there's also this final point that Dr. Brown made. People need to be alive to work and deliver commercial projects. So there is that space for blended funds and innovative investments that allow the financing and the delivery of social infrastructure projects. I want to thank you for your attention. I believe this is one of the final panels this afternoon, but I wondered if you could join me to appreciate our distinguished panelists for their very helpful and insightful contributions to this important discussion. Thank you very much.